Once, the 4th of July smelled like sizzling butter, backyard smoke, and recipes no one remembers anymore. What happened to the flavors that once held a nation together under fireworks skies and fading traditions? Red, white, and blue Jell-O salad was not just a dessert. It was a spectacle. On every 4th of July picnic table from the 1950s through the 1980s, this towering gelatin mold shimmered like a patriotic jewel. Red cherry on the bottom, white whipped topping in the middle, and blue raspberry or blueberry on top, each layer chilled and set to perfection. Sometimes there were little chunks of canned fruit floating in the red, and occasionally blueberries or crushed pineapple nestled under the whipped center. The Jell-O molds started disappearing from holiday spreads. What was once a centerpiece became a punchline. We traded in 3 colors and a childhood thrill for clear bowls of watermelon slices and Greek yogurt dips. But somewhere in an attic, the vintage copper mold still hangs. It remembers what we have chosen to forget. Grilled pineapple Spam skewers were a tropical revolution served with a side of Cold War optimism. Imagine smoky hunks of Spam, caramelized at the edges, skewered with chunks of fresh or canned pineapple, then kissed by a backyard flame. Fathers in sandals stood over charcoal grills with tongs in one hand and a can of beer in the other, flipping skewers like they were cooking in paradise. The sweet and salty contrast gave it all the charm of a Hawaiian vacation on a dime. But Spam lost its spotlight when low-fat diets and luxury meats became the norm. Pineapple stayed, but it moved to more elegant dishes, no longer paired with its unlikely partner in canned crime. We forgot that patriotic food could be fun, absurd, and delicious all at once. Today, you will not find this dish on any trendy cookout menu. But back then, it was Americana on a stick, processed, proud, and unforgettable. The firecracker. Hot dog casserole was what happened when creativity collided with a lack of groceries and a little too much enthusiasm for themed baking pans. Sliced hot dogs, bits of onion, a can of chili, and cornbread batter, all dumped into a star-shaped baking dish and cooked until bubbly and browned. This was the 4th of July in casserole form. It did not matter if it was fancy. It was easy to make, fed everyone, and tasted like a carnival in a pan. The firecracker part came from hot sauce or jalapeno slices buried inside, waiting to surprise a mouth or two. Kids thought it was hilarious. The old Pyrex dishes got packed away and the recipes went with them. Today we scroll for meals that take an hour but look effortless. But back then, nothing said celebration like a gooey, cheesy, spicy pan of pure sodium and joy. Patriotic ribbon sandwiches were not sandwiches. They were edible flags, stacked and sliced into dainty rectangles that looked like party decorations. Picture cream cheese dyed red, white, and blue, or layered with pureed vegetables like beets and spinach between slices of fluffy white bread. These were made in loaf pans, chilled until firm, then sliced into perfect uniform slabs. Served on platters with sprigs of parsley, they looked more like appetizers at a mid-century embassy gala than something made in a suburban kitchen. But that was the magic. Mothers and grandmothers did not just feed, they performed. These ribbon sandwiches were whimsical, elegant, and just a little weird. Every bite was soft, cold, and strangely satisfying. But this kind of food artistry demanded time, patience, and a lack of cynicism, none of which survived into the 21st century. Now, most sandwich fillings must come pre-mixed and pre-approved by a focus group. The ribbon loaf was left behind, buried under layers of irony and convenience. But in its day, it was an edible ode to precision and pride. The picnic drumstick loaf was one of the strangest marvels of vintage culinary illusion. It looked like a pile of cold fried chicken legs, but bite into it, and you were tasting a seasoned meatloaf. Shaped in molds to resemble chicken drumsticks, then chilled, sliced, and wrapped for picnic ease, it was genius in the way only mid-century cooking could be. The inside was a mix of ground meats, breadcrumbs, herbs, and just enough ketchup to keep things Americana. Mothers packed these in red plaid coolers next to deviled eggs and lemonade. At the time, this was seen as thrifty, clever, and, most of all, fun. It turned the ordinary into something spectacular, just by being willing to pretend. But somewhere between fast food chains and modern food snobbery, the meatloaf lost its shape. Literally. The art of illusion cooking faded, dismissed as kitsch. Yet there was something kind, even caring, in the effort to turn a picnic into a performance. The drumstick loaf was not just meat. It was theater on a paper plate. Barbecue bologna slabs were once the backyard delicacy of families that could not afford ribs but still knew how to party. Imagine a thick slice of bologna, scored on the edges so it would curl up like a flower on the grill. Slather it in sweet, sticky barbecue sauce, and you had a smoky, caramelized masterpiece that tasted like rebellion against the meat hierarchy. In the 1950s through the 1970s, this was the working man's barbecue. You could slap it between two buns with slaw, or eat it with a fork while fireworks popped overhead. But when bologna's reputation went south, so did its barbecue career. People stopped seeing it as creative and started calling it trashy. The slabs disappeared from cookouts, replaced by gourmet sausages and $12 burger patties. But make no mistake, those slabs were once a summertime crown jewel. Cheap, cheerful, and unapologetically delicious. Macaroni and pickle salad was what happened when someone opened the fridge before a picnic and said, "This will do." Cold elbow macaroni, cubed cheddar, sliced celery, and chopped sweet pickles, all mixed with a generous helping of mayonnaise and maybe a spoonful of pickle juice for kick. This was not a gourmet side dish, it was a miracle of utility. Served in massive yellow Tupperware bowls, it was the kind of thing that showed up without fail at family reunions and Independence Day spreads. The cheese sweated in the heat, the pickles turned everything slightly tangy, and no one cared. It was comfort in a scoop. Some versions even had bits of ham or boiled egg to stretch it further. But the real genius of the dish was its honesty. It did not pretend to be anything other than what it was, cool, creamy, and full of leftovers. Now, it is almost vanished. We gave it up for prepackaged pasta salads with clean labels and mysterious seasonings. But nothing ever replaced that strange little salad with the odd ingredients and the giant heart. Blueberry cheese pie with graham cracker crust was a masterclass in vintage dessert shortcuts. No one called it cheesecake, because it was not. It was cream cheese whipped with lemon juice and sweetened condensed milk, poured into a graham cracker crust, and topped with canned blueberry pie filling. It chilled for hours until it set into a tangy, jiggly wonder. Grandmothers made it in Pyrex pie plates, then covered it with plastic wrap and drove it 2 towns over in the back seat of a station wagon. One slice and you were hooked. The buttery crunch, the creamy middle, the sticky sweet berries that bled purple onto everything. It was never elegant, but it never needed to be. This was joy by the forkful. But when dessert trends changed and everything had to be either gluten-free, organic, or fancy, this pie lost its place at the table. Today, it survives in scattered recipe cards and fading memory. And maybe that is enough. Because this pie was never about perfection. It was about showing up with something made from love and a can opener. Cold-baked bean mold sounds like a punishment. But back in the 1950s and 1960s, it was a centerpiece. Take a can of baked beans, add unflavored gelatin, chill it in a ring mold, and top it with raw onion rings and a little parsley for color. It looked like a science experiment. It tasted like confusion mixed with tradition. This was not about flavor alone. It was about visual appeal, presentation, and the strange pride of turning canned goods into sculpture. You sliced it like a cake, and it wobbled on the plate, daring you to try it. Some guests did, some refused, but no one forgot it. It was part dare, part decoration, part recipe. And it came from a time when creative home cooks were not afraid to get weird in the name of celebration. But as our food became more polished and sanitized, we lost the courage to serve something unsettling. The bean mold disappeared, but the audacity behind it? That might be what we miss most. Fruit cocktail marshmallow fluff was summer sweetness in its softest, most pastel form. A bowl of whipped topping folded with a can of fruit cocktail, mini marshmallows, and sometimes shredded coconut or chopped nuts for flair. It was pink, It was fluffy. It was ridiculously sweet. And it was always there, resting in its own cold shadow on the buffet table next to the pies and potato salad. Kids loved it because it felt like eating dessert at dinner. Adults loved it because it took 5 minutes and 1 mixing spoon. No baking, no boiling. Just dump, stir, chill, and serve. This fluff was the culinary equivalent of a lawn chair, uncomplicated and exactly what you needed. But eventually it became the punchline to 1,000 jokes about the 1950s. It was called fake, lazy, outdated. And just like that, it vanished from the table. But for those who remember scooping it from a glass bowl with a plastic ladle, it still lives in that cold, sweet memory of summers long gone. Coca-Cola marinated ribs were what happened when sweetness met smoke and said, "Let's throw a backyard party." In the 1970s, this recipe swept across picnic tables and charcoal grills alike. Pork ribs were soaked in a marinade of Coca-Cola, ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes a splash of liquid smoke. The soda's syrupy sweetness worked magic on the meat, breaking down the fibers while adding a caramelized edge once it hit the flame. Dads called it their secret weapon. Moms copied the recipe onto index cards with flair. The ribs came out sticky, tender, and just a little bit wild, like summer itself. Kids would lick their fingers down to the wrist. The smell of them cooking was a neighborhood event, but as soda fell out of culinary favor and rib techniques got more serious, this quirky concoction faded. No dry rub or fancy smoker ever quite brought back the joy of ribs cooked with pure, unapologetic cola. It was never just about the flavor. It was about the feeling of standing barefoot on the grass, grill smoke in the air, and sweet, messy ribs that made you feel like you were living high on the hog. Flag sheet cake with buttercream and berries was the edible banner of every 4th of July celebration from the 1960s onward. You took a boxed white cake, baked it in a long rectangular pan, and slathered it with homemade or store-bought buttercream frosting. Then came the artistry. Rows of sliced strawberries for the red stripes, piped frosting for the whites, and a corner of blueberries dotted with icing stars for that old glory vibe. It was sugary patriotism at its most sincere. There was nothing fancy about it, but it always earned a chorus of oohs when brought out to the table. It was a cake meant to be admired, then devoured by sticky fingers and paper plates. Everyone got a square, and everyone had a favorite corner. Over time, fancier desserts nudged it off the table. Berry tarts, flag-themed trifles, even parfaits tried to take its place. But none of them had the humble heart of that cake. You did not need a culinary degree to make it. Just a little time, some patience, and a whole lot of love for red, white, and blue. Bologna salad sandwich spread was the lunchbox savior of 1,000 summer picnics. You started with bologna, cheap, pink, and often a little sweaty from the fridge. Then you ran it through a hand-crank meat grinder or food processor, added a big dollop of mayonnaise, a spoonful of sweet pickle relish, maybe a bit of mustard, and stirred until it resembled a meaty paste. It was a curious shade of pinkish beige, but it packed flavor. Spread it thick between slices of white bread or on Ritz crackers, and you had a sandwich that stuck to your ribs and your memory. Some versions threw in boiled egg, grated onion, or even shredded cheese. It was the food of economy, yes, but also of nostalgia. Every bite tasted like sitting on a picnic blanket, sun in your eyes, ants marching nearby. These days, deli meats are artisanal and spreads come from the refrigerated section. Bologna salad's reputation didn't survive the era of food shame. But to the ones who grew up eating it, this pink, creamy mess wasn't just a sandwich. It was a story, a ritual, a comfort that clung to the roof of your mouth and your heart. Grilled cheese-stuffed zucchini boats were born from gardens that overproduced and fridges that underwhelmed. Big summer zucchinis, hollowed out and loaded with cubes of Velveeta or slices of American cheese wrapped in foil and tossed right onto the grill. The result? A soft, smoky vegetable vessel bursting with molten, gooey gold. This dish was part resourcefulness, part whimsy. It felt like a side dish pretending to be an entree, or maybe the other way around. It showed up at potlucks and cookouts, usually made by someone with a backyard garden and a lot of opinions about what real cheese should taste like. It was vegetarian before the word got trendy, but it never claimed to be healthy. Just delicious, melty, and weirdly satisfying. Somewhere in the shift to kale chips and grilled portobellos, the zucchini boat sank. It was too humble, too messy, too cheesy for the modern palate. But once, it was summer food at its finest. Strange, sincere, and hot enough to burn the roof of your mouth if you were impatient, which we always were. Frosted sandwich loaf was culinary theater, and no one batted an eye. Picture this: 3 layers of sandwich fillings like egg salad, tuna, and deviled ham, stacked like a cake and frosted with whipped cream cheese. Garnished with parsley, radish roses, and the occasional olive ring, it was the ultimate showstopper for baby showers, holidays, or patriotic potlucks. Sliced like a dessert, it revealed neat layers of pastel fillings and soft white bread, crusts removed with the precision of a surgeon. People gasped, children stared. It was bizarre, it was beautiful, and it was delicious, if you did not mind eating a tuna cake. It spoke to a time when hosting meant effort, when food was expected to do more than just taste good. It had to dazzle. But as our parties got casual and our recipes went digital, the sandwich loaf quietly exited stage left. Too much work, too much mayonnaise, too many raised eyebrows. Still, for those who remember it, the sandwich loaf wasn't just retro, it was regal. A queen of the cold buffet, now resting in peace somewhere behind a wall of Pinterest boards. Cherry cola gelatin ring was a dessert with flair and fizz, often pulled from the fridge like a magician's trick. Canned black cherries and cola were folded into cherry jello, then poured into a ring mold and chilled until jiggly perfection. Sometimes there were walnuts, sometimes cream cheese. Occasionally, a swirl of sour cream on the side for the brave. It was sweet, dark, and oddly refreshing, like drinking a soda and eating candy at the same time. The ring shape gave it an air of formality, a kind of Midwestern elegance. When it arrived at the table, guests didn't know whether to applaud or flee, but it always disappeared in scoops. This dish thrived in the era of molded salads and gelatin adventures when dessert was both architecture and experiment. But time caught up to it. Cherry cola lost its charm, and jello molds fell into obscurity. Today, it might look like a relic, but back then, it was a little crown of color and courage. It took guts to serve it, and even more, to love it. Barbecue chicken potato chip bake was born from desperation and genius. A casserole that relied on pantry staples and convenience, it featured chicken breasts or thighs baked in a tangy ketchup-based barbecue sauce, then topped with a heavy layer of crushed potato chips just before the final bake. The chips got crispy, the sauce bubbled up, and the whole thing smelled like a picnic trapped in an oven. It was salty, sweet, and crunchy in all the right ways. Moms loved it because it was fast and used up leftovers. Dads loved it because it tasted like snack food met Sunday dinner. Kids loved it because chips were involved. No one questioned its logic. It was dinner. Somewhere along the way, the casserole fell from favor, deemed too lowbrow, too high sodium, too vintage for modern meal planning. But there was something thrilling in every bite of that chip-crusted chicken. It was comfort food with a secret identity. Party snack by day, weeknight savior by night, and it always felt just a little bit rebellious. Canned peach and cottage cheese towers were the unspoken stars of every old-school buffet line. Take a ring or half of canned peach, place it on a lettuce leaf, and spoon in a dollop of cold cottage cheese. Stack another peach ring on top, repeat the cheese, and finish it off with a light dusting of paprika. It looked odd. It tasted intriguing. The sweetness of the syrupy peach met the salty tang of the curds in a clash that somehow worked. It was cooling. It was light. It was a nod to health food trends of the 60s and 70s, back when cottage cheese was practically a lifestyle. But it also felt a little fancy, thanks to the garnish and the tower-like structure. These days, cottage cheese gets whipped and turned into TikTok recipes. Peaches are fresh, grilled, artisanal. The tower has fallen. But this strange little salad was once a staple. It asked nothing of you except a fork and an open mind. And that maybe is exactly what summer food should be. Grilled bologna and pineapple sandwiches were the unofficial snack of beach days and block parties. Thick slices of bologna seared on the grill paired with golden rounds of pineapple, either fresh or straight from the can, stacked between hamburger buns with a swipe of mustard or mayo. Wrapped in foil and tossed back on the grill to get toasty, they came out smoky, sweet, tangy, and just greasy enough to feel like you were getting away with something. It was a flavor explosion that no one talked about in cookbooks, but everyone remembered. The combination was pure Americana, a tropical twist on a lunch meat classic. It was cheap, it was fast, and it made sense in the way only grilled food does. But as time moved on, we became ashamed of bologna and suspicious of canned pineapple. The foil-wrapped sandwich fell by the wayside, replaced by sliders and artisanal paninis. Still, there was a time when that sandwich hit harder than a fireworks finale. And once you've tasted it, you never forget. Frozen strawberry shortcake logs were the dream of a dessert that required no oven and very little fuss. Graham crackers layered with whipped topping and macerated strawberries stacked into a loaf shape and frozen overnight. When sliced, it revealed lovely pink and white stripes, soft and sweet, and a little crunchy from the barely thawed crackers. Sometimes there was a drizzle of chocolate syrup, sometimes a cherry on top. Always cold, always nostalgic. This wasn't shortcake in the traditional sense. It was a dessert pretending to be cake, wearing a coat of convenience and summer charm. It showed up at cookouts, potlucks, and pool parties, brought out with fanfare and eaten in silence. Because once you started, you didn't want to stop. But with time came change. Freezers filled with store-bought novelties. No one wanted to assemble dessert anymore. The log was forgotten, its layers collapsed in the heat of modern efficiency. But if you ever made one, you remember it. The slicing, the stripes, the first cold bite of strawberry summer on a fork. Tangy celery salad with olives and pimentos was the kind of dish that showed up icy cold, crisp, and unapologetically bold. Chopped celery gave it crunch, while green olives and diced pimentos added a salty, tangy bite that cut through the heat of a summer day. It was all held together with a creamy dressing, often just mayo thinned with vinegar and maybe a pinch of sugar to soften the punch. Served in chilled bowls or lettuce cups, it was more refreshing than it had any right to be. There was no lettuce, no filler, just a bite that made your jaw tingle. You'd find it nestled next to deviled eggs and ham slices at church luncheons and bridge club tables. Today it might seem too sharp, too vintage, too much. But back then, it was proud, precise, and perfect in its own strange way. It was a salad meant to wake you up, not put you to sleep, and it always delivered. Pineapple upside-down cupcakes were a backyard barbecue's answer to fancy dessert. Festive, portioned, and a little bit whimsical. Each cupcake tin held a swirl of brown sugar and melted butter, a pineapple ring tucked neatly inside, and a cherry right in the center like a ruby crown. Spoonfuls of yellow cake batter covered the fruit, and into the oven they went. When flipped out, they emerged glossy and golden, perfectly caramelized on top, juicy in the middle, and soft as sunshine beneath. They smelled like vacation. They looked like a party. They tasted like nostalgia wrapped in syrup. You'd find them at birthday parties, potlucks, or any gathering where someone cared enough to bring dessert but didn't want to deal with a knife and plates. Their charm was in their simplicity. You didn't need frosting, just a fork and a smile. They've faded into the background now, replaced by cupcakes with swirls and sprinkles. But once upon a time, these little upside-down beauties stole the show with nothing more than fruit and flair. Lemonade. Ice Ring Punch Bowl wasn't just a drink, it was a centerpiece. A vintage spectacle poured from crystal ladles into glass cups on dangling hooks. You started with lemon lime soda or ginger ale, mixed it with frozen lemonade concentrate, and scooped in sherbet, often orange or raspberry, for a creamy fizz. But the real magic was the ice ring. Made in a bundt pan, it held lemon slices, cherries, or mint leaves suspended in frozen lemonade. When placed in the bowl, it bobbed like a lemony halo, keeping things cool and beautiful. It was a staple of baby showers, bridal teas, and backyard parties where paper streamers danced in the breeze. Everyone watched the ice ring melt and break apart, sending citrus bits swirling through the punch like confetti. Somewhere between then and now, punch became passé. But the punch bowl wasn't just about the drink, it was about ritual, about scooping and sipping and smiling across plastic tablecloths. And if you ever had a glass of it, you remember it sparkling like summer in a cup. Grilled peanut butter and banana packets were a sticky, smoky tribute to indulgence, an Elvis-worthy treat wrapped in foil and kissed by fire. You'd take a banana, slice it down the middle, and stuff it with dollops of peanut butter. Sometimes chocolate chips snuck in, or marshmallows, or a drizzle of honey. Then it was wrapped in foil and set on the grill, where the banana softened and the peanut butter melted into gooey perfection. Open the packet and you had dessert that looked a mess but tasted like heaven. It was sweet, salty, warm, and rich, comfort food disguised as campfire fare. Kids loved unwrapping their own. Adults pretended it was for the kids. It didn't matter. The point was the fun, the foil, the mess, and the moment. These days, we chase protein-packed snacks and low-sugar treats. But back then, a grilled banana filled with peanut butter was enough to make the world stand still for a few bites. Pimento macaroni loaf was one of those dishes that dared you to try it and surprised you when you liked it. Cooked elbow macaroni mixed with shredded cheddar, chopped pimentos, and a mayo-based binder, all pressed into a loaf pan and chilled until firm enough to slice. It was served cold, sometimes on lettuce, sometimes with crackers, always with a little confusion and a lot of curiosity. The loaf held its shape with quiet dignity, each slice revealing a patchwork of red pimento dots and soft yellow pasta. It was potluck food with a retro heart, and for those who grew up with it, it was weirdly comforting. You couldn't quite call it a salad or a casserole, it was its own thing. Texture was everything. Flavor was gentle. It never got flashy, but it never needed to. Somewhere along the way, molded pasta dishes fell out of grace. But this loaf was a time capsule on a platter, cold, cheesy, and proud of it. Red-hot cinnamon apple slices looked like dessert pretending to be lipstick. Thick apple rings simmered gently in a syrup of Red Hot's candy until they turned jewel-toned and spicy sweet. The apples softened but held their shape, and the syrup clung to them like lacquer. Chilled and served with a dollop of whipped cream or even a scoop of cottage cheese, they were equal parts refreshing and daring. It wasn't a dish for everyone. Some found it strange, too candy-forward, too artificial. But others delighted in the playful heat, the way it tingled behind the sweetness. It was often served on holiday tables or fancy luncheons, a nod to presentation and creativity over convention. As tastes shifted, Red Hots disappeared from kitchen cabinets, and this dish faded with them. But if you ever had a chilled bite of cinnamon apple fire on a fork, you remember it vividly. It didn't try to be wholesome, it just tried to be memorable, and it succeeded. Cucumber mint gelatin mold was what happened when someone tried to bottle a breeze and put it on a plate. Pale green from cucumber juice and lime jello, with flecks of grated cucumber and fresh mint folded in, it was served cold and glossy from a ring mold. The flavor was subtle and herbal, meant more to cleanse the palate than wow the senses. But in the right moment, after a heavy meal, on a hot afternoon, it worked. Served in thin slices, it was sometimes topped with sour cream or nestled next to a cold chicken salad. Guests were polite about it. Some loved it. Others left it on the plate. But it was always there, a shimmering side note in buffet lines and tea parties. Today, savory gelatin is a punchline. But this mold carried a quiet sophistication, an attempt to make food feel light and refreshing without giving up formality. It wasn't dessert. It wasn't quite salad. It was somewhere in between, like a whisper on a plate. Tang pie and graham cracker crust came straight from the space race to your summer table. A no-bake wonder whipped from powdered tang, sweetened condensed milk, and whipped topping, poured into a graham cracker crust and chilled until sliceable. It was bright orange, shockingly sweet, and tart enough to make your mouth pucker. Kids loved it. Moms loved that the oven stayed off. It tasted like astronaut food collided with dreams of Florida vacations. It was zippy, retro, and proudly artificial. Some versions added orange zest or cream cheese, but the core was always that neon powdered tang, packed with vitamins and promise. Today, we look sideways at powdered drink mixes and crave authenticity. But back then, this pie was pure joy in a pan. It didn't pretend to be homemade. It was proudly prefab, quick to make, and gone before the condensation dried on the pie plate. If you grew up with it, you can still taste that wild burst of orange. It never really left your tongue. Grilled potato plank skewers were summer's answer to fries with flair. Thick slices of potato brushed with oil and sprinkled with paprika, garlic salt, or dried herbs, skewered onto wooden sticks and grilled until crisped on the edges and fluffy in the middle. Sometimes they curled a little from the heat. Sometimes they charred just right. Served hot off the grill, they were passed around like corn on the cob. No forks, no fuss, just flavor. Kids loved the novelty. Adults loved the price. They were easy to customize, endlessly flexible, and somehow always the first to disappear. You didn't need ketchup, though no one complained if you brought some. They belonged at picnics, campouts, and backyard birthdays tucked next to hot dogs and sodas. These days, potatoes show up in air fryers or covered in truffle oil. But the skewer version was different. It was food you held in your hand and shared with laughter. Simple, hot, and happy. Frozen 7. UP salad walked the line between side dish and dessert with no shame at all. Made from whipped topping, softened cream cheese, crushed pineapple, mini marshmallows, and a splash of 7-Up, it was poured into a casserole dish and frozen into a pastel block of sweet citrus fluff, sometimes green, sometimes pink, always cold and sweet and full of chewy surprises. You'd slice it into squares and serve it next to ham or turkey like it belonged there. It kind of did. The carbonation gave it a little lift. The pineapple brought the tang. The marshmallows made it magical. It was the darling of potlucks and Easter tables, where Jell-O molds and fruit salads once reigned supreme. As the decades passed, we got picky. We wanted our sweets from bakeries and our sides from scratch. But this frozen salad was pure delight on a hot day. It didn't need a label. It just needed a spoon and a second helping. Jimmy Carter's presidency was defined by a commitment to human rights and global diplomacy, and one of his signature state dinners in 1977 reflected those values. This dinner, held in honor of Middle Eastern leaders and human rights advocates, was a statement of Carter's vision for the world. The meal highlighted his emphasis on global peace and social justice, especially in the Middle East. The menu was a comforting and elegant showcase of American cuisine, beginning with roast lamb, a nod to Middle Eastern culinary traditions, followed by fresh, seasonal vegetables representing Carter's commitment to environmental issues. For dessert, peach cobbler brought a touch of Southern hospitality to the table, a reminder of the president's Georgia roots. Invited guests included leaders from the Middle East, as well as key figures in the human rights movement, with Carter aiming to build bridges across cultural divides. The dinner was a chance for the president to demonstrate U.S. leadership on the world stage, focusing on human rights and encouraging peace in a region often mired in conflict. Carter's belief in diplomacy was so strong that he famously joked, "If this dinner doesn't go well, I'll have to break out the peach cobbler for a second round of peace talks." A meal served with both purpose and charm as Carter worked to use every opportunity to make the world a better place. William Harry Harrison and John Adams would have probably gotten fairly well, and we even have a conversation starter for them. Do not underestimate the connections that a shared love for a drink can create between two upstanding gentlemen, especially when we are talking about hard cider. While it has gone a bit out of style these days, it seems it has a track record with presidents. The Willard Hotel is one of the few places to host two presidents, and Ulysses S. Grant is the second person who enjoyed his stays at the hotel. Perhaps his favorite restaurant would be Delmonico's. It was a New York place that got pretty famous for its simple fare, which Grant was an avid fan of. Grant's love for Delmonico's steaks was so well known that the restaurant even named a steak after him, the Grant Steak, which was served with a side of fried oysters. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy hosted a landmark state dinner with one goal in mind: to celebrate the enduring friendship between the United States and France during the early years of the Cold War. The occasion was especially significant because it marked the first official state visit of French President Charles de Gaulle to the U.S. The dinner was a statement of cultural diplomacy, showcasing the deep ties between two nations with shared democratic values. The menu served as a tribute to French cuisine, as JFK was known for his appreciation of good food and for fostering cultural ties through it. The evening began with a rich French onion soup, followed by the main course, filet mignon with béarnaise sauce, a classic French dish that highlighted the sophistication of the French culinary tradition. Asparagus with hollandaise sauce added a refined touch, while champagne parfait offered a sweet, celebratory end to the meal. The guest list was a who's who of diplomats, with de Gaulle and other dignitaries in attendance. This dinner was a diplomatic event meant to strengthen the U.S.-France alliance at a time when both nations were seeking to navigate the tense geopolitical climate of the Cold War. Kennedy, known for his charm, reportedly remarked that the only thing more exciting than this dinner is the prospect of working together with France to build a stronger world. A meal fit for diplomacy, and a toast to the power of international friendship. With a name like Theodore Roosevelt and a history of rough and stern campaigns, you would think that he could down a pint or gallon of whiskey or scotch without any worries. However, he was actually a light drinker, and he prided himself on the fact, to the point that he sued a newspaper for claiming that he was a heavy drinker, which was a case he won. What Roosevelt did enjoy were mint juleps every now and then. Maybe it's a secret White House detox routine? Zachary Taylor was more or less cut from the same cloth, direct in his leadership and even more blunt and plain with his food. Wherever he went, he had the simple tastes of a boy raised in the southern countryside. He typically had cornbread at whichever tavern he went to and loved steakhouses that were popular. John Adams faced a daunting task as the second president of the United States, keeping the fragile republic stable in a time of political division and international tension. His state dinners reflected that mission. These events were about showcasing resilience and fostering diplomacy during a contentious presidency. Think of it as Adams saying, "We may be a young country, but we can host with the best of them." The guest list featured foreign diplomats, political allies, and influential members of Congress. In short, the room was full of people Adams needed to impress, or at least keep on speaking terms. The focus was clear: maintain unity, promote diplomacy, and avoid the political gridlock that often haunted his administration. The menu leaned toward refinement with a touch of indulgence. Turtle soup, a prized delicacy of the time, opened the meal, followed by roast duck and seasonal vegetables. Dessert was an apple tart, a nod to both the simplicity and abundance of American orchards. Adams knew food was more than sustenance. It was a statement of prosperity and stability. Adams, never one to mince words, once joked that he'd rather eat alone than argue at dinner, yet he knew the power of a shared table. While his presidency had its share of turbulence, these dinners were a diplomatic success, blending civility with a touch of culinary excellence. Zachary Taylor, on the other hand, probably had the healthiest history with drinking compared to any of us, presidents or not. Give the man a fresh glass of milk, and he would be ready to get up and lead the country, which we are not sure if that is a statement about the properties of milk or a craving that was only severe enough in Zachary. Franklin Pierce was also a fan of New England cuisine, especially things like fried clam. He loved visiting coastal areas like Maine and Rhode Island. Most of the presidents of the early era of the American presidency did not have many favorite places they would go to, because the restaurant industry was not half as developed. they still had areas where they frequented to get their preferences met. After the transformative events of the 1960s, Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency focused on healing the nation's divisions and celebrating progress, especially in the realm of civil rights. In 1965, LBJ hosted a state dinner that reflected the growing unity and the cultural changes in America, especially the strides being made in civil rights. The event was an opportunity to promote American values of equality and inclusivity, while also solidifying the country's leadership on the world stage. The menu was a celebration of Texas-style comfort food, a nod to Johnson's roots. Guests were treated to barbecued ribs, tender and flavorful, accompanied by cornbread, another Southern classic. Texas-style chili added a spicy kick, while pecan pie provided a sweet homegrown dessert to wrap up the evening. It was a dinner steeped in the traditions of the American South, designed to showcase the diversity of American culture. The guest list was diverse, with leaders from the civil rights movement and political elites in attendance. This was a deliberate move by LBJ, who was committed to building bridges within the country while navigating the challenges of a world still reeling from the tensions of the Cold War. Civil War generals and whiskey go together like peanut butter and bread, but Ulysses S. Grant in particular was fond of binging on some Old Crow whiskey. Most people in high-ranking political seats took to champagne more than crude brands like that, but he liked to keep it honest and to the point with his drinking. No top notes, middle notes, and fancy flavors, just plain old swill that gets you drunk. When James Buchanan, as not busy chewing down cabbage at the White House, he often enjoyed sauerkraut in German restaurants. And when even that bored him, he visited Pennsylvania for its famous Dutch food, though there are little references to any particular names. Buchanan was known for his bachelor lifestyle, and as the only unmarried president, he often relied on the hospitality of local inns and restaurants for his meals, giving him the title of a true foodie of his time. George W. Bush's 2007 state dinner was an elegant affair designed to celebrate the enduring bond between the United States and the United Kingdom. Hosted in honor of Queen Elizabeth II's visit, the dinner marked a moment of reflection on the long history of shared values, friendship, and collaboration between the two nations. The menu was a refined choice of classic British-inspired dishes with a touch of American flair. Guests enjoyed Dover sole, a delicate and prized fish from the waters of the English Channel, paired with a light spring pea soup to start the meal. For dessert, a traditional British trifle offered a sweet, layered finish to the evening, with fruit, sponge cake, and custard. Queen Elizabeth II and her husband, Prince Philip, were the distinguished guests of honor, with numerous U.S. political leaders in attendance. The dinner was a tribute to the special relationship between the two countries, emphasizing the mutual respect and enduring alliance forged over decades. In keeping with royal tradition, President Bush joked that he had spent considerable time practicing his British accent in preparation for the dinner. The event was about celebrating the personal ties that have long bound the U.S. and the U.K. As Bush noted, the Queen doesn't just rule, she rules with grace. A fitting tribute to a monarch who had witnessed so much history. Abraham Lincoln was just like that, and he found a place to express that through Ford's Theater, which hosted performances of theater and also had meals for the visitors. Another place that he was known to visit was the Café de la Régence, which was known to be visited by high-ranking politicians at the time. Lincoln, known for his love of simple fare, once joked that a plate of plain apples and a glass of milk could keep him perfectly content at any gathering. The first state dinner hosted by George Washington set the stage for presidential hospitality in a brand new republic. Held during his first term, this gathering was designed to embody the values of the young nation: unity, civility, and strength, while also demonstrating that America could host as graciously as any European court. It was, in many ways, a diplomatic debut for the United States. The menu featured hearty, quintessentially American fare. Guests dined on roast meats, including beef and lamb, paired with fish dishes and seasonal vegetables. A true standout was the hoe cakes, a colonial favorite made from cornmeal, served with honey and Madeira wine. Though modest by today's standards, the spread was a thoughtful blend of simplicity and refinement, much like Washington himself. The guest list was a mix of foreign diplomats, government officials, and notable figures of the fledgling republic. It was a strategic move, allowing Washington to establish his leadership style while bringing together diverse voices under one roof, a challenging yet necessary feat for a nation in its infancy. Washington, who famously lacked a natural inclination for small talk, once joked that his dinners were less about conversation and more about filling bellies. Yet, his understated charm and attention to detail made these gatherings essential in fostering unity. John Quincy also had a deep appreciation for a very specific kind of wine, Madeira, which is a classic American favorite. It is said that the forefathers were toasting with and emptying bottles of the stuff, so it only makes sense if the sixth president pays for his patriotic recipes with a fresh bottle too. James Monroe did not really have a favorite restaurant in particular because, like Jefferson, he gained a taste for the finer delicacies of French cooking. Once you get hooked, you get onto it for life, and back in their day, most local places did not specialize in French cooking at all. James Monroe ate the same way during his stay at the White House, too. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman hosted a pivotal state dinner to discuss these very issues, aiming to solidify America's role in post-war reconstruction and strengthen relations with Europe. Among the distinguished guests were Winston Churchill, key European leaders, and American political elites, all gathered to chart a course for the future of the Western world. The menu featured baked ham, a hearty American classic, paired with sweet potatoes, a dish that evoked a sense of home and tradition. For dessert, there was cherry pie, a quintessentially American treat, symbolizing the nation's resilience and optimism in the face of global challenges. To accompany the meal, Truman served wine and champagne, raising a glass to the hope of a prosperous, cooperative future. The dinner served as a backdrop for high-stakes discussions on the Marshall Plan and other post-war initiatives. With Europe in ruins, Truman and his guests discussed how the U.S. would lead the way in rebuilding the continent and preventing the spread of communism. Churchill, ever the wit, joked that Truman was much more hospitable than our British dinners, adding that the cherry pie was the true weapon of mass reconstruction. Sometimes even diplomacy requires a little sweetness. The 14th president, Franklin Pierce, had a strong affinity for all kinds of alcohol. He never had a preferred drink that would preside over the others in terms of taste, but from scotches and brandies to vodkas with no chasers, the president could certainly drink. Maybe his terms were particularly stressful, even by president standards? Thomas Jefferson did not really jibe with the comforts of the simple life at the corner of a bar, but instead, he found a lot of solace in French cuisine and fine dining. The two go together as well as jam and toast do, so it is no wonder he spent a lot of time in Paris visiting restaurants like La Petite Venise and Café de Paris. Jefferson is also credited with introducing macaroni and cheese to America after discovering it on his travels in Europe. Joe Biden's first state dinner, held in December 2021, marked a pivotal moment in the post-pandemic world. The event was a clear statement of the United States' commitment to rebuilding international relationships and restoring global alliances, particularly with North American neighbors and key global leaders. The dinner was a platform for addressing climate change and affirming America's leadership on the global stage, with special attention given to environmental issues. The menu for the evening was a carefully curated blend of American comfort and fine dining. Guests enjoyed lobster, short ribs, and a decadent chocolate cake, reflecting the lavish yet welcoming tone of the gathering. The meal was an elegant reminder of America's culinary prowess and its ability to host a diverse range of international guests. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, along with other prominent global leaders, was in attendance, underscoring the importance of United States-Canada relations in the Biden administration's foreign policy. The dinner was a warm, engaging celebration of unity and collaboration on global challenges like climate change, setting the tone for Biden's foreign policy approach. Grover Cleveland was a massive fan of all things beer. Not just the drink itself, the large beer jugs or cups you would get them in, late-night trips to the bar, drinking competitions with friends, and bar culture as a whole. We like to think that the idea of going to get a few beers has evolved from just grabbing a drink to becoming a social activity. Grover's relationship with the drink certainly testifies to that. John Quincy Adams, on the other hand, was not really a fan of eating for enjoyment at all when he was at the White House. In his diary, it is never really mentioned where he liked to eat out or what he enjoyed, but apparently he thought 6 or 5 small crackers and water were a sumptuous dinner. Ronald Reagan's state dinner in 1982 was a celebration of the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, two nations united by shared values and Cold War concerns. Held in honor of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the dinner was designed to reinforce the strong ties between the two countries at a time when global tensions were high. The menu was a showcase of American grandeur, with dishes that exemplified the best of U.S. hospitality. The meal began with poached salmon, elegantly presented and accompanied by a light, flavorful sauce. The main course featured filet mignon, tender and perfectly seared, an indulgent American classic. For dessert, guests enjoyed a decadent chocolate soufflé, a sweet and sophisticated finale to the evening. The guest list was a carefully curated mix of global leaders and key political figures, with Thatcher taking center stage. The dinner was about reaffirming the strategic alliance between the US and the UK during a time of geopolitical uncertainty, particularly in Europe. Andrew Johnson probably could have benefited from 1 glass less and a bit more, following in Lincoln's notes with his water intake. His speech at the president's inauguration seemed to show that despite how much he loved his whiskey and getting his drink on at parties, he was not half as good as handling his liquor. Martin Van Buren loved going to places with good seafood, honoring his Dutch background with a good oyster. Oysters and various other kinds of seafood were common parts of Dutch culture back then, and despite growing up in Kinderhook in New York, he still tried various parts of the cuisine. He had a great love for fine dining and grand tables. George H.W. Bush's state dinner in 1990 was a momentous occasion, held at the end of the Cold War, a historic turning point in U.S. history. The dinner celebrated not only the triumph of democracy, but also the U.S.'s leadership in bringing an end to the decades-long standoff with the Soviet Union. Hosted in honor of Mikhail Gorbachev, the dinner marked the beginning of a new era of U.S.-Russia relations. The menu was as lavish as the occasion, beginning with a delicate lobster tail, followed by a perfectly prepared filet mignon, both symbolizing the elegance and strength of the U.S. at the time. To cap off the evening, the guests were served baked Alaska, a decadent dessert that would have made any Cold War adversary melt. Gorbachev, along with European leaders, were invited to the dinner, where the focus was on celebrating democracy's victory and fostering an atmosphere of cooperation between the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. The dinner was a powerful symbol of the diplomacy that led to the peaceful end of the Cold War and the beginning of a more hopeful international landscape. Bush, with his characteristic humor, quipped that baked Alaska was the perfect dessert to represent the collapse of the Soviet Union, a little fiery on the outside but soft and warm on the inside. The dinner served as a reminder that while the world was changing, the U.S. would remain a steadfast leader. However, Zachary looked good in comparison to most of us, except perhaps Millard Fillmore. The man would never be seen with a drink of any kind besides water, and he would always top himself off with a glass whenever you would see him. It kind of made sense since his skin was way too young for a man of his age, but that goes to show that you should never skimp out on your hydration. Despite having a French cook and a basement filled with French wine, Andrew Jackson was always found visiting the many places in Nashville where you could catch a good bite to eat. From things like chicken sandwiches to steaks, he was often at any tavern or inn with good grub. Jackson's fiery personality matched his love for hearty, simple meals, and he often ordered multiple steaks in one sitting. Barack Obama's 2009 state dinner in honor of Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was a landmark event in U.S.-India relations. Held to deepen diplomatic ties between the two nations, the dinner emphasized their shared commitment to democratic values and highlighted India as a rising global power. Obama's approach to foreign policy had a strong focus on building partnerships with emerging nations, and this dinner was a perfect reflection of that. The menu was a fusion of American and Indian flavors designed to honor both cultures. Guests enjoyed a vibrant green curry with prawns, a nod to India's rich culinary tradition, followed by a comforting lentil soup, often a staple in Indian cuisine. For dessert, a pear tart offered a subtle, sweet finish that tied the meal together. Prime Minister Singh and his delegation were joined by key international diplomats, underscoring the importance of the evening. The event also reinforced the growing cooperation between the U.S. and India on issues ranging from trade to climate change. As Obama remarked, "Tonight, we celebrate our shared values, our partnership, and the strength that comes from our democracies." James Monroe probably took his love for wine the farthest. A lot of people would opt for getting souvenirs or hitting up tourist spots when they find themselves in France, but a president on political visits chooses to go importing thousands of bottles of French wine instead. Looks like when there are no restraints, people's love of wine can go far beyond what you would expect. Millard Fillmore liked anywhere with good New England cuisine, and one of the places that had a good knack for it was the Willard Hotel. That place opened up during the time he was president, and it became a hub for influential people to eat and rub shoulders at. In particular, he loved places with a goof-clear soup. While you might think Sir George Washington was a rather sophisticated man who would have hobbies like golfing and reading, he actually loved his beer just like anyone else, particularly dark porters, which were a drink he would distill and make himself in his Virginia estate near Mount Vernon. It seems Washington had a deep appreciation for porters above all else, and a chilled cup was something you would always see in his office. When James Madison was not busy with the lovely cooking his wife would prepare with the fresh produce of the Montpelier estate, he was reportedly busy at various inns and taverns in Philadelphia. He had no proper favorite that he would swear on over all else, but he liked sampling everything the city's various establishments had to offer whenever he could. Guess he was adventurous? Rutherford B. Hayes may not be the most celebrated name in presidential history, but his state dinners carried a profound significance. Serving as president during the turbulent years following the Civil War, Hayes used these gatherings to promote reconciliation and unity. His administration's focus was clear: mending the nation's divisions after Reconstruction and showing that the United States could indeed move forward together. At his table, former adversaries sat shoulder to shoulder, a symbolic effort to heal the wounds of a fractured nation. The guest list reflected this mission. Prominent Northern and Southern leaders were invited, making these dinners a rare opportunity for dialogue and understanding. Hayes was serving a vision of a united America, one dinner course at a time. The menu, much like Hayes himself, was modest yet thoughtful. Roast chicken and baked fish with cream sauce provided hearty staples, while mashed potatoes offered a comforting touch. Dessert was cherry pie, a nod to American tradition and simplicity. Hayes's wife, Lucy, was the First Lady to ban alcohol from the White House, earning her the nickname Lemonade Lucy. While the dinners were dry, the conversation flowed freely. The goal wasn't extravagance, but familiarity, reminding guests of shared values and a common heritage. Despite Calvin Coolidge serving during the Prohibition, which famously banned alcohol, he did not seem to agree with the sentiment too much. He loved his Tokay wine after all, and he would get pretty well acquainted with the Hungarian wine behind closed doors. No paparazzi to disturb your private time with those first sweet sips, right? Andrew Johnson was a simpler man, though, and he liked to relax with a good prime ribeye from anywhere in the Midwest. He often grew up eating cuts of beef of all kinds, so he definitely knew his way around the grill in more ways than one. You will find that he is not the only president to share a passionate love for steak either. Herbert Hoover had a pretty alcoholic palate as far as presidents go. While you have some getting whiskeys named after them and others only enjoying the finest of French distilleries, Herbert chose to keep it on the down low with a tame dry martini. At best, he would just mix in some vermouth to dilute the gin. This is one president that actually abided by prohibition, it seems. John Adams was similar to the man in the chair before him, and he loved unwinding down at a tavern in Boston known as Mason's. See, Mason's was a cozy little joint that the president could drink at without any disturbances. Adams was known for his appreciation of simple New England fare, often enjoying a hearty bowl of clam chowder. John Tyler and his wine parties were a sight to see whenever you would go by the White House, and if you were lucky enough to be attending the kinds of French wines they would serve, they were immaculate. Both his wife and him seemed to share a mutual hobby for collecting and trying out different wines, and he even wrote to his daughter at one point about how much he loved the drink. If this parade of frosty molds made you smile, tap subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and drop a comment about the weirdest vintage dish you still secretly love.